Welcome and welcome back to the listeners on the podcast, as well as now our viewers on YouTube or wherever you may be seeing this. This is What Just Happened, How to Survive the Family Court. Thank you so much for tuning in yet again. We're now already up to episode 4 of this podcast. You can hear it on Player FM, on Stitcher, on Spreaker, iTunes, or Podbay. And of course now you can view us in the recording as well. What Just Happened, How to Survive the Family Court is produced by Raskin Industries in conjunction with Rhode Island Free Radio. The video is provided by Pixels Digital Productions, and we thank you so much for joining us. Listeners and viewers, I cannot overstate the importance of what we're going to discuss today, what I call the secret of the family court, the closest held secret of the family court, a secret held by that court for generations and generations in compiled unwritten rules on scrolls and kept in the utmost secrecy by the courts in their crypts and defended by unspoken evils and dangers down there. The secret that no one wants you to know and no attorney is going to tell you. And we're going to bring it to the light of the day, expose it, and discuss it for what it is today, because it's something that I think you should know before you walk into court. Now, I've hoped that you've listened to me in the past 3 episodes, and that there is at least, if not a trust, at least some kind of the beginning of a relationship between you and I, because what I'm going to say today I think will make me somewhat unpopular, certainly among other attorneys, and it's bound to turn many of you off as well. And that is why I didn't want to open with this kind of discussion in my very first podcast, the inaugural podcast, though I think it's the most important topic that we could discuss, and I think it has the greatest potential to help you personally and professionally through this experience. I thought that leading with it in episode 1, before you had really any idea of who I was or what we were trying to do here, was perhaps a bit foolhardy, and I think you'll come to understand later on. With this episode, as with all, we very much look forward to your feedback. You can get back to me personally at timothymsweet@gmail.com. You can call me at 401-595-1665, and I would love nothing more than to hear from you all as to what you think of this podcast in general and any kind of constructive criticism as we move forward, or what you make of today's discussion. For those who are turning in for the first time to episode 4, this podcast is dedicated to the family court and to those who are anticipating having to enter the family court in the near future, and trying as best we can to really kind of bridge the gap between the beginning and the end of your experience in the family court, to put a bridge over what I like to refer to as the toxic swamp of the family court, to get you over that bridge through the family court quickly, minimizing your stress, and have you come out with as much dignity as is possible, with your heads held high. And to that end, this is something I want you to hear and understand before you ever go to court, and that's this. No one, and I mean no one, wins in the family court. No one wins in family court. No matter how much you've paid to your attorney, no matter which attorney you choose, no matter what you've been through or what's your evidence, regardless of your intentions, it's been my experience in 7 or so years in the family court that, strictly speaking, no one waltzes into the family court and walks out a better person, a more unified family, or with the children in a better situation than when they did when they walked in. There are, of course, Pyrrhic victories throughout. You or your attorney could win a motion here or advance on some kind of procedural directive there, but 30,000-foot view, looking at everything from beginning, middle, and end. And the hundreds and hundreds of, maybe thousands of people I've spoken to and dealt with in the family court over much of the last decade, it is my honest opinion that you'd be hard-pressed to find a parent, a spouse, or a child who walked out of the family court better than they walked in. It is, or it can be, in the hands of the wrong attorney, a place that robs people and families of their autonomy, of their futures, of their finances, and of their dignity. Now, when I say no one wins, this is something that I've taken to speaking about in consultations with my own clients when they come in and they ask me some version of, how am I going to win this? Or can you win this, meaning me? Or some iteration of that. And I always tell them this, the people in consultation with me, and it's helpful for them, I hope. And I hope it's helpful for you now, if you are in fact in the beginning stages of this, is that if you are able to quantify the stress and the loss and the burden of failure of a relationship or a marriage that so many people bear through the Rhode Island Family Court, not to mention time out of work or time away from your child or children to spend afternoons and mornings in the family court, and you look at how your life is contextualized before and after, I think you would be understanding when I say that no one wins in the family court. But what does that mean, and how do we move forward? I think the most important thing is that people come through and they look at this as an opportunity instead of an obstacle. They look at it as a pivot point or a transition into what may or may not be a better life, but it can be a more self-reliant life. They can grow as a parent, and they can grow in their own lives once they come to realize that if a relationship or a marriage has come to an end, that they are solely responsible for their own futures. Now, you may be listening and thinking, well, my attorney isn't going to lose. I'm not going to lose. And here's what I'll say. If you could conduct exit interviews throughout the family court of people who have come and gone, and you speak to them about their insights and how they feel, you may hear something like the following. You'll hear a husband in the middle of a divorce who will tell you, I'm very happy, I kept my house, or I got my house, I won my house in the divorce. And he does, he gets the house, and wife's name is taken off the house, and here he has it, and he's all alone. But what he has ended up with, more often than not, what he finds is he's entered into a refinance mortgage in which he is the sole obligor for a house which, when he closed on it, he thought he would have the opportunity to have a two-income, or at least, if need be, a two-income family in order to help pay for the mortgage, taxes, and insurance. And he has a house that he may well now find he can't afford, in which he may find haunted by the memories of the life that came before. You may have a mother of a child custody case coming out of the family court saying, I've won custody of my child. I have my child with me predominantly throughout the week. His or her father can see the child on the weekends. But the child is going to live with me primarily, and many would consider that a victory, as they should. But then you have to look at it pragmatically and say that you now have the child throughout the grind of the work week with school and extracurriculars and cooking and laundry and homework and events. You have your child throughout the most difficult part of a month or a year. And that child then has more free time, some would even say more quality time, with the father, who, of course, in this instance may well tell you that he has lost and feels he has lost, because now instead of living with his child and seeing his child several times a day and watching his child grow up, will feel as though he's very much on the other side of the fence and that he's only getting these inconsistent opportunities to see his child on weekends or during the summer. And part of this is inherent in the family court system. I don't know, I wouldn't think that the idea of winning and not winning would apply to criminal court. I would certainly think that if in criminal court where you get a tidy guilty or not guilty or even a plea, then you could have a victory, or a bankruptcy court if you're able to discharge debts. But the family court and the family dynamic is not one that lends itself to elegant division. Another thing that people often look for in the family court is for it to be a basis for them to be heard on all of the issues that is affecting them. And they think that a judge will somehow be patient and listen to this. The judge is not there as a therapist or a counselor and will not want to hear your context or your story of how you came before them. Even if the parents are better off, even if you were to call me or email me and tell me that I entered into the family court and here is where I am now and here is where I was before and this is why it's better for me, you'll then have to tell me how it is better for your kids. How it's better for your kids who at the outset of your relationship had two well-intentioned, loving, caring parents and are now split in a very tense agreement between two parents who each feels is left to parent on their own and to make up for the slack of the other. I'll give you one example, although it may sound absurd to those of you who have been blessed enough not to go to the family court before. There was a divorce matter in which there were several contested issues, but this particular couple had a pair of dogs. They had a great affinity for these dogs, and one party had fought tooth and nail for what we'll call, for lack of a better word, custody of these dogs. These puppies were her whole life. And in the end, she was granted custody of these dogs. And you would say, if you look at it briefly, you would say, well, that must be a victory. I wanted the dogs are now mine, and I was granted custody of the dogs. But what you'll see is that there's often a dichotomy between what is written in an order and what stands to reason given the pragmatics and the spite and the bile of effectuating that order in the real world. I'll take it back to our now ex-wife who had won custody of her dog. She went to pick up her puppies from the ex-husband's home, and when she arrived, one had come kind of lapping up to her and was very happy to see her, but she couldn't find the other. They were the other of the two puppies she had quote-unquote won at the ex-husband's house. And so she found herself becoming panicked and looking for the other dog, and was kind of stalking the neighborhood in a fright, looking for this dog who was apparently being kept in the basement by the ex-husband, who, as far as I can tell, kept the dog there in the basement for no other reason than to panic his ex-wife out of some kind of reprisal or retaliation for not having one, in my air quotes, custody of both dogs. And there's every divorce like this? No, of course not. And are you accustomed to stories like this? No. If you've never been to family court, and maybe if you're not a dog person, you're not at all accustomed to these kinds of games. So at some point, and again, this is why I did not lead with this discussion, but at some point, you'll have to take my word for it, that the family court does not lend itself well to appointing a victor and to elegantly dividing time with children and financial assets and tax consequences and debts. It does its best, and the judges are wonderful, as are many of the attorneys. But from the party's perspective, from your perspective, if and when you do enter, the family court cannot address the underlying issues. It can't address why it is your relationship fell apart. It can't rewire the brain of your ex-husband or your ex-girlfriend. the issues, the underlying issues, continue to persist, and the family court is wanting to address them. And that is why I say glibly, but it's something I hope you keep close to your heart, that there are simply no true winners in the family court. And as with every rule, there's going to be an exception. And so I look to you, all of you, victims of domestic violence, be it physical or sexual or psychological. The victim of domestic violence can certainly seek absolute relief in the family court. And the victim of domestic violence should expect to and can hope to be a victor in the family court. They are our one exception. The family court is very adroit and certainly well adapted to helping those victims of domestic violence. But for everyone else, you will want to cross the swamp quickly, and you will want to either use the bridge that we hope we afford in this podcast or know where to step on the lily pads and the stones. Again, this is a podcast that's called What Just Happened? Surviving the Family Court. We thank you very much for listening or for watching, wherever you have found us. And next week, as this has been a bit of a downer, next week we're going to discuss what you do now. So if you have to go to family court, not unlike someone who perhaps has to go to the DMV, if you're looking at it as an errand that you must entertain and get through, then if you can't expect to win but you have to go, what do you do? And what does that leave you? Again, we love your feedback. If any of you feel as though you have gone to family court and won, then those are stories we would certainly love to hear, because we don't hear of them enough. This is Timothy Sweet. My email, timothymsweet@gmail.com. Phone number 401-595-1665. My website is timothymsweetlaw.com. Thank you. Please tune in next week.